Hi everyone, it's Wednesday the 9th, it's just after 4:30 p.m. That can only mean one thing, it's webinar time. I'd like to welcome you all to today's filtered webinar, Excel 2016, What's in it for me, which will be our final webinar of 2015. The webinar will be led by former chairman of the ICAW IT faculty and filtered course author Simon Hurst. But before I pass over the controls to Simon, I just wanted to say a quick few words about Filtered. We're an online training provider specializing in the use of adaptive technologies to personalize content, accelerating learning and reducing training time. Check out filtered.com to see our range of courses which can train your staff in key business and software skills. To everyone that's been involved with and attended our webinars this year, I'd like to say a huge thanks. This is the 12th webinar of the year, and it's great to see how responsive and interested people are, and we'll soon confirm our webinar program for 2016. We'll publish it on the usual webpage, learn.filtered.com/webinars, so keep an eye out for that. You can also follow us on Twitter with the hashtag #filteredwebinar to get updates, report back, or to send us questions. Simon will be answering your questions throughout the session, so please do send them in as we go. You can do that via the chat pane in the webinar, but we'll also collect them after the webinar, so feel free to send them in to us at hello@filtered.com. Right, that's it from me. So now I'd like to hand over to Simon to start the webinar. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. We're going to be looking, as we say, at 2016. What's in it for you? Is it worth upgrading? And I'm going to try and take you through the most significant parts of the Excel changes. I'm going to start off with the interface changes. These obviously affect Excel. Actually, let's make that a bit bigger. So we can still make things bigger in 2016. So the interface changes, one of the most important, particularly for anybody who really hates block capitals, is that the Microsoft experiment with block capitals for ribbon tab headings, which surfaced in Excel 2013, has now gone back to proper case. So we've got big and little letters for our ribbon tabs. A lot of people will be really pleased with that, and really pleased that that particular experiment only lasted for one version. Perhaps more significant for most people is the tell me what you want to do box. So we can see that up here. Now that box, it's useful now. It would have been astonishingly useful if it had been released when Excel 2007 came out. Excel 2007, some of you will remember, was the first version that used the ribbon, and lots of people had lots of trouble finding stuff for hours, weeks, potentially years after they upgraded, because obviously moving from menus and toolbars to the ribbon made a big difference to where people went for stuff. Tell me what you want to do is really the ideal answer to that. It's just a shame it's 8 years late. So if you want to do something like look at decimal figures or something, then you can start typing your search term into the tell me what you want to do box, and that will then list items that might match your search term. At the top there will be things you can do directly, so here you can see that the commands from the appropriate ribbon tab to decrease and increase decimal are available straight from the box, or you can go for more information, you can get help, or you can use the new Smart Lookup feature. So Smart Lookup, I probably need to finish the word decimal for Smart Lookup to do anything useful. But that will then open the Insights pane on the right side of your screen, and that will use your internet connection to go and download interesting things about whatever you've searched for, as you can see there. Just get rid of that. So I think those bits are good. There's something that some people may find also good and other people may hate, and that's the quick access toolbar. For those of you who haven't used the quick access toolbar, yours might be up here. So if you've never really sort of bothered with the quick toolbar, it might still be stuck in the top left-hand corner of your screen. I've moved mine down so it's a bit more visible. And the change to the quick access toolbar in 2016 is that there's much more space around each of the tools. Now, that would be useful to you if you're using Excel on a touch device, because unless you had particularly small fingers, it was quite difficult to click on a single command with the old Quick Access toolbar. It's now much easier because there's more room. On the other hand, if you decided to try and replicate the old Excel toolbars by putting pretty much everything on your Quick Access toolbar, you'll find now that they take up much more room, and there'll be a button on the right-hand side that will allow you to get to any icons that don't fit in your existing Quick Access toolbar. So they're the main interface changes. Let's now go and look at some of the new features and the enhanced features in 2016. We'll start with the new forecasting capability. So the idea here is that you can produce a statistical forecast of a set of data that includes a date or time element, and then forecast that a number of periods into the future, including, if you want to, different levels of confidence. So if we go to the Data ribbon tab, and over here in the Forecast group, we have the Forecast Sheet option. We can click on that, and as long as our data has a properly structured set of time and date fields, that will create a preview of a chart of our existing data and then a forecast into the future. We can choose how far into the future we want to go, and we can also set a series of options. So we can forecast into the past, or no, I think that's probably so that you can start your data at a particular point. You can set the confidence interval. So you'll see here that there are lines above and below the main line. That shows the range of values that the future prediction might fall into. And the higher the confidence, the wider apart these lines will be, because you have to be more confident that the item will fit within the lines. So if we were to say we don't really care, we only need to be 50% confident, you'll see that the gap between the lines is much less than when we want it to be 95% confident. It will allow for seasonality, so where we have ups and downs throughout the course of a year, as long as we've got enough data that it can recognize the seasonal pattern, it will work that out for us. We can do various things to do with how it copes with missing points or duplicate points. And we can also include, for statisticians or mathematicians, a set of forecast statistics that explain things about how the forecast is produced. The chart itself can either be a line chart or it can be a column chart. As you see here, if you use a column chart, you get error bars rather than the confidence interval lines. When you're happy with your options and the chart you've chosen, click on Create, and a new sheet will be created showing you your chart and the table of figures. So it's constructed a table of figures there. Let's just move the chart out of the way a bit. This is the statistical figures, which, as I say, statisticians amongst you might recognize. And these are the actual figures, and these are the predicted figures, and they're created using a new set of functions. So these functions are also new to 2016, a set of functions to work out forecasts and confidence intervals. Worth mentioning that, I think perhaps slightly strangely, the way this sheet is created, these figures are not linked back to the original. So if your original data changes, your forecast sheet won't. So these are just copied, the data is just copied from the original. It's not a formula that will update, worth being aware of that fact. And we've just got a couple of examples. That one shows the use of the line, and this one, the use of the bar chart with the error bars. Let's now have a look at pivot tables. There's been a few useful changes to pivot tables. One seemingly small one, but quite a useful one, is the new search field. Just before I look at pivot tables, I'm just going to see if there's any questions that I need to answer on anything we've done so far. No, apparently not. So we'll plow ahead with pivot tables. So we have a search field. Now, if you've only got half a dozen fields, obviously you can see them all. But you've got lots and lots of fields, particularly if your data has several tables. Each of those tables has several fields. It can take a while to find the field you want. So the new search box means you can start typing in the name of the field, and it will narrow down the fields for you, so you can quickly choose your field, add it to your pivot table. So I'm going to add a date field. So we're going to look for order date. So I'll type in beginning of order, and you'll see that I can now see my order date. I'm going to drag order date to one of the axes, and you'll see a couple of new features here. One of them is prior to 2016, if you added a date field to a pivot table, what you would see was the individual items in that date field. So in fact, in our underlying data, I can show you the underlying data over here. In the underlying data, the date is a daily date. So if we'd added it in the old version, we'd just get a whole row of individual days. So it would be a very up and down chart with loads of days. And what you'd have to do in the old version is then group those dates to whatever grouping you want, years, months, quarters, whatever. In 2016, that grouping is done automatically. So just by adding the dates, you'll see that we've now got our data grouped into years with a plus sign beside, and we can just expand the years to show the quarters and the quarters to show the months. And the additional fields for years and quarters are created as additional fields. So if we wanted to use one, for example, as a filter or something like that, then they just work like any other pivot table fields. Let's just collapse those. So we can click the minus to collapse. And we'll just have a look at the chart, because there are new buttons in the chart which allow you to drill down through your data. So we can drill here to quarters, months, and back up to years, and then down again to quarters and to years, just using the buttons in the pivot chart. So let's change to pivot tables. One of the big changes in recent years in Excel has been a greater concentration on the data analysis capabilities of Excel. And pivot tables, pivot charts is obviously an example of that. There have also been some new ways of visualizing your data. So 2010 introduced spark lines, little charts that fitted in cells. Apparently, there haven't been any new chart types introduced in Excel since Excel 97. So somebody told me, I don't know whether that's true, but it sounds vaguely plausible. That was until 2016. And like so many things, you wait for 18 years for a new chart type, and then 6 come along at once. So here we've got a couple of new chart types. We have histograms and we have a Pareto chart. So here is our example. Let me just recreate the category histogram. So if I delete the existing one, here's my data. And what a histogram does is to show you frequencies. So it will show you how much of a particular product we've sold compared to the other products. So if I go to Insert and Charts, here are the new options. So here we have a new statistic chart, and one of those options is a histogram. Now by default, the histogram isn't based on categories. Instead, what it does is just to look at the values, and it allocates the values to different bins. So a bin would be a sort of a range of values from 1 to 6, from 6 to 12, and so on. But if you want to do something different, so maybe if you want to use the product names as a category for your charts, you can double click in the horizontal axis, and you can choose, rather than using bins, you can choose by category. So here we've chosen by category, and we can see our quantities shown by our different products. And the one underneath shows the by bin method, and you'll notice that it's very different from the default bin, and you can go to the axis, you can go and set how wide you want your bins to be. So if you wanted your bins to be wider, you can change the values in each of the bins, and you can also set up overflow and underflow values, as we can see there. Now, the histogram is in effect two charts in one, because the other type of histogram we can create is a Pareto chart. And if we go to insert statistical charts again, you'll see that there's the second option, the Pareto chart, and that will look hopefully pretty similar to the one we did here, the Blue Peter version. And here you'll see that it sorts our frequencies and puts a cumulative percentage line, so we can see just how many clients or how few clients are responsible for, say, 40% of our sales. So that's sort of a one-click Pareto chart. Let's have a look at some of the other chart types. So this is a good one. I like this one. Let's just get rid of this. This is a sunburst chart. And the idea of a sunburst chart is to show values by hierarchy. So what we've got here, we've sorted our data by salesperson, by customer, by product. So we see what the total value of sales of each product for each customer, for each salesperson was. And that's then organized in our sunburst chart into three levels. So we have our salesperson level at the bottom. So we can see that Margaret Peacock has sold the most. And then the middle ring is our customer section. So we can see which customer is Margaret Peacock's best customer. And then for each customer, we can see which product they bought most of. And this actually isn't a 2016 feature, but it's a 2013 feature that perhaps not everybody spotted in 2013. Slicers, this is a slicer, originally introduced in 2010 to work as a filter for pivot tables, and extended in 2013 so you can add a slicer to a straightforward table. And what that means is if I just wanted to look at a single salesperson's data, I can click on that salesperson and I can just see how his clients relate to his total sales and how his products relate to his total sales. Or I could maybe compare two salespeople by clicking one and holding down Control, clicking another, or I could just drag through a couple to compare three customers. So that's the sunburst map, working with hierarchical data. This has three levels, and the obvious question, I don't know whether anybody's asked it yet, but the obvious question is how many levels can you have? And I heard this last week from somebody at Microsoft. Apparently, there are an infinite number of levels where infinite equals 256. That's a sort of mathematical joke. So you can have 256 levels. This is another hierarchical chart. This is a tree map. Does pretty much the same sort of thing, but instead of concentric circles, what the tree map does is to show different size boxes. So we can see here that our Belgian box is smaller than our Brazil box, for example, and then we can see the different customers within Brazil to see who the best customers in Brazil are. The difference between the tree map and the sunburst, apart from shape, is that tree map can only cope with 2 levels. You can only have boxes in boxes, not concentric rings. Now the next chart type is, again, odd if you're not a statistician. This is a box and whisker chart. And what this does is it shows you how the various, in this case we have our customer IDs for 5 customers together with the individual invoice amounts. And this shows how our invoice amounts break down statistically. So it shows the mean invoice amount, and then it breaks the invoice amounts down into their different quartiles. So these are the different quartiles, and you'll see that customer ID Bergs has 3 little dots. These are outliers. These are statistically outside of the top quartile and show as outliers. So the spodges are outliers. Just for a sort of a bit more explanation, I've reproduced a box and whisker chart just for a single customer, and I've used the Excel quartile function to show where the quartiles are, first, second, and third quartiles, and you can see that the box and whisker chart marks the position of those quartiles, and you'll see here one value way over all the others. That classes as an outlier and is the spot there. So that's the box and whisker chart. A very useful chart if you're working with financial data is the waterfall charts. Now, it was possible to create waterfall charts prior to 2016, and in fact, the filtered course, I think it's the advanced Excel course, does have a section that takes you through creating a waterfall chart in previous versions of Excel. And what you have to do is you have to create invisible columns that the other columns sit on. Fortunately, you don't have to do that anymore. Let's just see how easy it is. Let's delete our existing one, click in our data, and we go back to our charts. There's a particular section for waterfall charts. We'll choose our waterfall chart. And what a waterfall chart does is to show you movement from an opening position to a closing position, perhaps with other balances on the way. And so here we've got a sort of a cash flow forecast. So if you're in business, you'll recognize some elements of this. How much cash did we start with? How much profit did we make? How much extra did we collect from our debtors? How much did we have to pay back to our creditors? What tax did we pay? Giving us our closing cash position. Now, you may have noticed that this doesn't quite look like the one we looked at earlier. And that's because we haven't yet told Excel which are the totals columns. So we can do that by clicking on an individual column, and then we can either right click and choose set as total when it will become a total column, or we can double click and set as total in the format data point pane, and that then ensures that the opening and closing position are our 2 totals, and we can see very clearly how the movements during the year take us up and then back down from our opening cash position to our closing cash position. Very useful chart, whatever size of business you happen to be working in. So from something that's useful to everybody to something that is also useful to everybody, but even more useful if you've got lots of clients all around the world. Here we have a set of data that includes some geographical fields. So over here we have address, city, postcode, country, and this is sort of sales invoice information. We've got invoice value, products, order date. So remember we looked at the order dates being grouped earlier on. There are our individual daily order groups. And what we're going to do is going to try and turn that into a 3D map. We're going to plot our data by country. So we go to the Insert ribbon tab and then 3D map, and we'll create a new tour. I was hoping that was going to be a bit slower so I could have a quick mouthful of tea, but regrettably it's quite quick. And then we can add our country to the location box, and you'll see that the country shows up as 100% confidence. Now, if we click on that, that will show that it's managed to plot all the locations on our map. Had we gone for a different field, so if, for example, we'd gone for city, then only 60% of cities can be plotted. There are some where it's not sure which country that city is in. So, for example, over here in the UK, we all know that Washington is actually in the northeast of England, whereas some people believe it also to be in America. So you need to, for cities, include the country as well sometimes in order that it knows which country you're referring to. We'll use country because that's nice and easy. And you can see here the little dots showing that we've made sales in that country. Doesn't give us a great deal of information yet, but we can then use these other fields. We can say, okay, show those columns based on the actual value we've sold in those countries. So we've used the extended price field, which is our individual invoice totals. It sums those invoice totals by country to show that Germany has made a very high level of sales, more than some of the other European countries. We can also add a category. So we could say, let's look at salesperson. And here we can then see our columns broken down by salesperson. There are layer options down here. So we can, if the columns are a bit difficult to see, we can make them thicker, change the height. And we can swap between columns to clustered columns, bubbles, heat maps, make the heat map a bit wider, and regions. So lots of stuff you can do. Now I'm sort of selling this as a new thing in Excel 2016, which isn't quite the case, because this existed as an add-in for 2013. It was an add-in called Power Map, but it's moved from being an optional add-in to now being part of Excel itself. The other thing we haven't yet used, let's just add our category back in, our salesperson category back in. And we can also, and this is really, really exciting, especially if you've seen any of the statistician Hans Rosling's stuff on TED. What he does is create animated maps showing you all sorts of exciting things about the world as we know it. And you can do something similar here. So we can choose a date field, time or date field. We can add that into our chart, and then that lets us play our chart over time. So let's just use these buttons to maneuver our chart a bit so we can see what's going on. Let's zoom in a bit. And then let's just play our chart over time using the order date, and we can see how our sales build up over time. So we can animate our charts. Now the way that 3D map is structured, we're working in a layer. We can have multiple layers. If we have multiple layers, they all appear at the same time. So if I was to add a new layer, then if I chose a different method of showing it, so let's do that. Let's use country again, but this time let's use heat map. Let's have a value, and let's make the layer a bit wider. We can see the heat map. So we've got layers, and the layers appear at the same time. If we wanted, instead of that, to sort of look at stuff sequentially, so to look at one visualization then another, we can have scenes. So layers build up into scenes. We can have multiple scenes. Scenes build up into tours. When you have a scene, you can decide what it's going to look like, give it a name, you can decide how long it's going to appear on the screen for, how fast it's going to play through, and you can also fly over it or rotate round it, so you're in an aeroplane watching your chart build, and you can also choose the type of map you're going to use. So we could choose, for example, a more satellite-y type map. So you create your entire presentation. You can then play that as a tour. That will then play through. It will use your visualizations. It will fly over them as you've discussed. And I think for most of us, that's going to be preferable to Christmas afternoon telly. So what we can then do is we can then turn that into a video at a range of resolutions that we can then play on our domestic DVD player to entertain the family on Christmas afternoon. What could be better? As I said, Power Map was an add-in that's now become part of Excel. There's another add-in, which is Power Pivot, which hasn't yet become part of Excel. Well, a bit of it has, the data model has, but Power Pivot itself hasn't. I won't go into Power Pivot in great detail, but if you know Power Pivot, it's just a method of bringing data into Excel like you would for a normal pivot table, but it just gives you much more capabilities, bigger sets of data. I think Microsoft claim hundreds of millions of rows of data you can bring into Power Pivot. And there's been some new bits. So cosmetically, it's easier to see what's going on. When you look at the data, it's just better defined by having lines in tables. You can also create new date tables. So if you already use Power Pivot, you will know the necessity of having a table in your data that includes all possible dates. That can now be created automatically. And Power Pivot has its own function language, data analysis expressions, and there are now lots of new data analysis expressions, as well as the ability to use data analysis variables. If you've exhausted the challenge of normal Excel functions, if you're all over all existing Excel functions and you want a new challenge in your life, then have a look at Power Pivot and DAX, because some of the DAX functions are a lot more complex than any corresponding Excel function. Others are dead straightforward, some are a bit chunkier. So a couple of add-ins, one of which became part of Excel and one of which didn't quite. What we're going to look at now is, I think, perhaps one of the most important add-ins, which was Power Query. And Power Query is now an integral part of Excel. And I think as much as what Power Query itself does, the fact that the Power Query tools are now part of Excel, they're at the Get and Transform group of the data ribbon, really indicates the direction that that Excel is moving into. Lots of the recent changes in Excel, not least those in 2016, are all to do with data analysis, data visualizations, really working with data to do more with data. Now, that doesn't mean that they're for big companies. I think there is this misunderstanding that pivot tables, even the humble pivot table, is all about big data and big companies. I think all of this stuff is equally applicable to the smallest of companies. I run a consultancy. I send out probably a dozen invoices a month. I analyze my accounts using pivot tables. You can't get a great deal smaller than my organization, and I use pivot tables. So I think anybody can use pivot tables. And all of these new tools sort of are based on the idea behind pivot tables, the idea of manipulating data in Excel. And that data, needn't be the Met Office statistics for the last 50 years. It could just be a list of products, invoices, sales, whatever, just stuff from your accounting system that you want to ask questions about and understand better. And Power Query, now Get and Transform, is sort of the first step in that route, because what Power Query does is it helps you get at the data. So if you click on New Query, you can see you can go and get your data from a variety of sources. So hopefully this isn't the case now, but in the old days, one of the only ways to get data out of some systems was a text file with each of the fields separated by commas. It was called a comma-separated value file. So you can get data from a comma-separated value file. Perhaps more relevantly these days, you can get it from an Excel workbook. You can get it from databases. Some of these will perhaps be the databases that your accounting systems run on. Or if not, then from other sources includes ODBC, as well as some very specific data feeds, such as Facebook, Salesforce. From ODBC may give you the chance to use the likes of Sage, QuickBooks, those sorts of things. So you can bring your data in, and Power Query then gives you the ability to tidy that data up. So to sort out data, put it in a form that has the information you want, that you can then use all the other tools, pivot tables, pivot charts, 3D map, all of those things you can then use on that data to visualize that data and explain it. Where I think these Power Query tools, Get and Transform tools, may be the most revolutionary thing within Excel 2016 is that you don't have to get external data. You can use these tools on data within Excel. So this was a question that was asked on one of the accounting forums, Accounting Web. In fact, if any of you use Accounting Web, somebody asked how they could compare two lists and identify items that weren't in list B, but were in list A. So they wanted to add the ones, I'll say that again, but sensibly. They wanted the items that were in list B but not in list A, and then they wanted to add those items to the end of list A. And you can do that with Power Query. So over here is the Power Query answer. So the way you do it is quite straightforward. You click on your table, turn it into a table first using the table tools, give it a sensible name, Department A, and having turned it into a table, you can then bring it into Power Query. So just click on From Table. That opens it up in Power Query, and you can see your data. You could do what you want with it. Maybe add a column with Department A in, so that you know where it's come from. So you can do add column, add custom column, and give it a name, Department, and equals Department A, and that will then create your new column for you. So I've sort of got a Blue Peter version of this. For those listening abroad who weren't subjected to the BBC in their formative years, Blue Peter is a children's program in the United Kingdom that used to make all sorts of things like Tracy Island from Thunderbirds out of various domestic items, sticky back plastic, that sort of stuff. Obviously doing that sort of thing takes an enormously long time, so they always used to do it in stages, and they'd get somewhere and they'd say, here's one I did earlier. So here's one I did earlier. Let's just display the queries. Here's our query in Department B, not in Department A. If I click on Edit, this shows the use of Power Query Transform to create our query. So we have the source of our data, which is our Department B. We then link that to our other table to show us the items that are in Department B but not in Department A. We then filter, so we just have those items. We then append our Department B items to our Department A items, sort our data by product number, get rid of the temporary columns that we've used to identify the matches, and when we've done that, that then gives us our complete table over here. So you don't have to worry about the steps. The point really I'm making is that we could have done that using some really complex Excel functions and formulae. What Get and Transform does is bring a whole new methodology to creating spreadsheets into Excel, possibly changing the way we all use Excel into the future. So just before I leap into questions, I'll see if I can answer one that somebody's bound to ask, which is, should I upgrade to Excel 2016? And the answer, as it always is with these things, is if you have the choice, it depends. And perhaps with 2016, what it really depends on is whether you want to use Excel 2016 or Excel to analyze and present data rather than just do sort of calculations and forecasts. If you want to analyze and present, then there's loads of really good stuff in 2016. Thank you all. That's the formal part of the presentation over. It's now on to questions, if there are any.
Thanks, Simon. We do have a few questions, 4 coming in from our viewers. The first is from Paolo, and he's asked, well, it's actually kind of along the lines of what you've just answered. How can I convince my boss at work that we should update to Excel 2016? What would you say is the best reason to update?
Yes, well, that's always a good question, convincing other people. It depends on your boss, really, and what they find exciting. If they like visualizations, then I'd, particularly given where we are, the 9th of December today, very, very close to Christmas, I think I'd do a quick 3D map of the company's sales data, turn it into a video, burn it to a DVD, and include it with your Christmas card to the boss.
Lovely stuff. Our next question comes from Tree, and Tree has asked, what form method is Excel used to generate the forecast model?
Were I a statistician, I'd be able to answer that. I believe there are some standard forecast tools, and I believe it uses industry standard tools. If you want to know, if you just look it up in the help, it goes through the methodology. It's a very good question because there are obviously different ways of doing forecasting. It does use a sort of statistically recognised way of doing it. Details will be in help.
Okay, I hope that's helpful, Tree. Our next question is Vincent. Can you create the power map in a 2-dimensional format?
Strange. Microsoft give us these wonderful 3D tools, and I've looked at, I've done power mapping webinars twice in the last couple of weeks, and both times the question I've been asked on 3D map is, can you do it in 2D? And the answer is yes, you can. In fact, you can do more than that, so I'm attempting to open one here. Might take a little while, but there is a in the 3D map ribbon, there is a flat map which will create it in 2D, and oh, there you go. One of the things with some of these visualizations, particularly on my aging computer here, that's quite exciting, isn't it? Is that they do use a lot of resources, which I've clearly run out of. And I can't click the OK button quickly enough to close all the windows. So it's really quite, it's a bit like the Sorcerer's Apprentice here. But as well as a flat map, which you'll have to trust me on, you can also create a custom map. I saw a recent presentation from Microsoft. I hadn't really been able to think what a custom map would be used for. And what they did was to show a coffee shop with bars and tables and things, and they showed the movement of people around the coffee shop and a heat map for where people clustered in the coffee shop. And then they did the same for a web page. They looked at the eye movement to a web page, and you had a heat map of where people looked at your web page. So as well as geographical maps, anything you can plot on a grid, you can use with 3D map.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Question 4 comes from Linda, also on power maps. It's, can the 3D power map function be used for a single country, for example, hospitals?
It's a very good question. You can zoom in. I think probably zooming in is probably the best you can do. If you want to do a simpler map than 3D map, one of the things to explore is Bing Maps. If I just see if this works, give me a second. Just grab a chunk of mappy data. So I think I have now officially wrecked Excel. Bing Maps is an add-in. So Excel 2013 introduced this concept of Microsoft and third-party add-ins, that you could go and download. And one of these add-ins is Bing Maps. It's much simpler than 3D Map. It's 2D. And it will automatically scale the map to just show the points that are marked in it. So if you wanted just to quickly show values on a map of England, whatever, you might find that Bing Maps and Bing Maps add-in is a quicker and easier way to do it. But you could zoom into the 3D maps as an alternative.
Okay, hope that answers your question, Linda. Number 5, so we've had a couple since the end of the webinar, so these will be our last 2 questions. Number 5 is from Imogen. What happened to VLOOKUP?
Would this have anything to do with my article in which I wrote Excel 2016 is here, VLOOKUP RIP? If you really love VLOOKUP, A, I need to talk to you afterwards, but B, don't worry, because VLOOKUP is still there, it still exists, it still works as well or as badly as it ever used to. My point with VLOOKUP RIP was simply that using the get and transform tools that we looked at the end, you could do a VLOOKUP using get and transform without ever using VLOOKUP. So you could use, here's an example where we can use VLOOKUP to work out our categories of nominal code, divide them into sales, cost of sales using a very skeletal nominal ledger here, and we could do that using get and transform without ever needing to use VLOOKUP. So never fear, VLOOKUP, favourite of many people, is still there, still works in the same way. Just never forget your false arguments.
I think we can all agree, long live VLOOKUP there, Imogen. And on to our final question, which comes from Simon. Have there been any developments in macros in this version?
No.
No, straight to the point there.
Well, pretty much no. Some of the new stuff works with VB. So some of the new objects, there are now objects in Visual Basic, so you can write macros that use the new stuff. But VB itself hasn't changed much. The VB editor looks pretty much the same. But it is still there. There were rumours quite a few years ago that Microsoft wanted to get rid of VB. And simple macro language in Excel and replace it with various other tools, but that hasn't happened. VB is still there. Microsoft is still saying that they're devoted to VB, and it will remain working for the foreseeable future.
Okay, brilliant. Simon, thank you very much for another fantastic webinar. Also, thank you to our audience for our questions. There's been some absolute corkers in there. And obviously, thank you for everyone attending Excel 2016, What's in it for me? Before we leave you, I've just got a few little bits I'd like to mention. The first is a massive thank you to Enterprise Nation for partnering with us for the webinar. Hope all of your members in attendance enjoyed the broadcast. More on sort of housekeeping bits now. The first thing is, if you do have any further questions, as I mentioned earlier, please do drop us an email at hello@filtered.com. We'll get back to you as quickly as we can. If you'd like to re-watch the webinar, it has been recorded, and you'll be able to find it on www.filtered.com/webinars within the next 24 to 48 hours. Another quick thing to mention is that the Filtered Excel course now does support the Excel 2016 version. So if you're serious about updating or have done so already, sign up to our Excel course and select the 2016 version to learn about all the new features. You'll be able to practice all of the things that Simon's been showing you there. Finally, we'd really appreciate to get your feedback on our webinars. So we'll be sending out a little survey after the webinar, so we'd really appreciate it if you could fill that in and help us improve our webinars moving forward. That's now everything from me, so I'd like to again say thank you to our presenter Simon Hurst, and from everyone at Filtered, massive thank you for joining us, and have a great evening.